Hey everybody, I feel like I'm in like theater in the round. I might have to like spin around a little bit. Cool, so I'm gonna talk pretty fast. In general, I talk really fast. When I get really excited, I talk really fast. So if you can't understand what I'm saying, sorry, I'm from New York. So, hey, it's me, AQ. Just a little bit about me. I'm really food obsessed. If anyone follows me on Twitter, don't do it. I basically just tweet about food most of the time. I ran this small meetup called Code Food Bar, which was an attempt to get nerds to not just eat pizza and drink beer. No offense. But yeah, so we met up, and I tried to start it in San Francisco again, but San Francisco is hard because everyone's kind of spread out. But in New York, we would meet up, like 15 of us, go to a really fancy restaurant and talk shop over really good food. I'm mainly in the open source Ruby and JavaScript community in terms of my open source contribution. I created this thing called Sammy.js, which is kind of faded out of favor. That's another long story. I'm bi-coastal. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, but I've been living out here for the past 2 years, and I've been going back and forth, basically spending a quarter of my time in New York and 3/4 of my time here. And yeah, I'm very excited to be here. On Twitter, I'm AQ. Thanks Joe and Librato guys for inviting me. On GitHub, I'm Quirky. My day job is the CTO of Paperless Post. And so even though I used to write a lot of code, I still do, but I'm like a product guy now, which is really weird. And for those of you who don't know, CTO stands for Chief Taco Officer. And for those of you who don't know what Paperless Post is, Paperless Post, we send out beautiful digital invitations. That's kind of what we do. Invitations and greeting cards and things for your barbecue, whatever you want. And we do it with a lot of open source tools. We have a big team. Or big, small. We're at the verge of big. 50 people, that's not really big. Big for us because we've grown a lot in the past year. Mainly in New York. Right now it's just me out here. And yeah, we're doing a lot of cool stuff. This is one of our designers created this. Paper's Gonna Pape. That's Hermes, our mascot. So the main thing I want to say about Paperless Post is that we have an amazing team. So I'm just kind of talking about other people's ideas. This is barely me talking here. And Paperless Post is like a really diverse team. We're diverse not just in terms of like faces, but diverse in terms of what everyone does. We're 30% developers now, and then 20%, like 15 people who are literally just standing there in the office, like drawing and painting invitations, which is really cool to be around those kind of people because they're very, very talented. And then we have product people and ops people and everybody, but we all work really closely together. But today, I'm talking about metrics. So when I talk about metrics at Paperless Post, I'm talking about everything. I know we had a really awesome talk just now about, kind of both, but mainly system metrics and operational metrics. But we really think about them as interchangeable, and when we talk about them, we really talk about them interchangeably. And we have tools for trying to measure both at the same time. And really, for us, we're a product company. If you're not improving your product, whether that's through the system, whether that's through making performance improvements, or through adding features, then what are you really doing? So the spiel, I'm sure, how many people here have read Lean Startup in this room, or at least know the spiel? So the main spiel of Lean Startup is this: measure, experiment, pivot, and then throughout all of that is metrics. So the idea is that you measure everything, right? You run experiments, or you create measurements, and you have that throughout your system. You make experiments to figure out whether, not just A/B testing, but primarily Lean Startup is focused on a lot on A/B testing, but maybe you're using ABC testing, or you're just creating new features, doing rollout, experimenting on your users, seeing what they like, what they don't like. Then you pivot. I know everyone in this room loves that word. And you change what you're doing based on those experiments, or don't change what you're doing. And throughout the whole process, you're collecting metrics. So at Paperless Post, we took some of those ideas and we created our own kind of thing based on it and based on some other ideas that we had internally. We call it moving the needle. And the idea is that we want everybody in the company to be involved in improving the company. That sounds like, obvious, but in a lot of places that I worked at and other people on the team worked at, it was especially as a developer, the act of writing a feature or deploying something or increasing performance, it was hard to see the connection that you were making when you're doing something to this greater goal of growing the company and being successful, right? It's really hard to put those two together. We had this really, really horrible, and true story, real talk now, we had this kind of horrible failed experiment at the end of last year where and I'm sure a lot of people in this room have been through a similar deal where at the end of the year, we're a very holiday-focused company, so December is our biggest time of the year. We had this idea that we were going to set this very, very lofty goal for the entire company in terms of how many cards we were going to send. And we told everybody, and we were like, you know what? If we hit this, everyone's going to be super happy. Not only are we going to do bonuses, but we're going to do awesome things for everybody. It's just going to be huge. It's going to be amazing. So we set this really lofty goal, which is a fixed number, right? And we set it in beginning of October, and we were like, okay, we're doing it. Everybody was driving, and everybody was doing what they thought in their minds was driving towards this goal, and we got really close, but we didn't hit it. We were, maybe 5%, 10% off. And in our minds, we were like, well, what did we do wrong? And it caused a lot of stress in the company because people were like, wait, was it me that didn't do enough effort to drive this goal, or was it someone else? Do I have to start blaming other people for not succeeding? So we realized that idea of tying something to a fixed number is just kind of stupid. One, it's kind of stupid. Two, it's completely unrealistic. And three, it was very disconnected from day to day what people were doing to what they actually saw happening as these big numbers increased. So we have a company that we not only practice continuous delivery, we also practice continuous process delivery. And continuous process delivery is a term that I coined, but it basically means that we're constantly not only deploying new things to production, but we're constantly changing our process to fit how we think things should go. So we came up with this idea called moving the needle, and moving the needle is pretty simple. So same thing as Lean Startup, measure everything. This is what this meetup is about, and I'm going to go more, because this is a metrics meetup, I'm going to talk more specifically about this than anything else. Set goal metrics attached to each feature. So everything that we do, we actually, before we do it, we say, this is the thing that it's going to change, or that this is the thing that we want this feature to change. Then we build and roll out in chunks. So a lot of people are probably familiar with the idea of feature flags. So building, as developers, that's probably not a really important part. And then later, we regroup and analyze. And then we figure out, it's not pivoting, it's just regrouping. It's figuring out, did that metric change? And it's really easy because from the get-go, we had just established this is what we wanted to change. And it's way easier to determine if we were successful or not because it's a real thing. So first up, measuring everything. And seriously everything. Ryman seems like a really cool approach to this in terms of monitoring, but we have our own kind of tools that trend to different areas. So we initially had this, I built this thing, and it was this dashboard, and it was beautiful, and it had all these beautiful numbers in them, except my math isn't very good. So those numbers were just wrong. And we had a woman on our team who was kind of our analytics engineer, our lead analytics engineer, and she was just disgusted. She looked at the dashboard. She was like, "This is awesome, but it's you're killing me here, basically," because to her, analytics were something fixed. They were numbers, right? They were something that you can establish truthiness on, that they were real. And the problem with that is that in her mind, she saw this and other people on the team saw this, and then they started drawing conclusions based on these kind of not completely fictitious, but fudged numbers, I would say. They weren't perfect. And they were like, oh, well, no one's creating cards right now because this thing says 0. I was like, oh, well, you know, Redis was down for like 20 minutes, and so people are creating cards, don't worry about it. And basically, I had to get in this really big argument with everybody, and then I realized that I was the one who was wrong. So what we did was we split things up. So we have 2 completely separate systems, and I know we didn't create this idea, but it's something that we came to. So we have an accounting system where numbers are absolute, and a trending system where numbers are relative. So for us, accounting are what we call KPIs, or key performance indicators, and again, not something that we came up with, but for us, KPIs are things that are in our database. So our data, the data is already there. We've been collecting it. We know how many cards were created today because that's how many cards are in the database. We know how many purchases happened because that's in the database. So we created a really simple thing. This is completely irrelevant because it's really ugly, and we've been iterating on it recently. But the idea is that this is just numbers, right? It's just a lot of information. The only important thing here is that we have a lot of different KPIs, or key performance indicators, like total unique senders, total free cards, and we have them for today, the percent change, the week, the percent change from last week, and 30 days and the change, and then year to date. And the way our KPIs work is they're from our existing database. How many people here are Postgres people, or know Postgres at all? How many people have heard of PLP SQL? Like 1 or 2 people. So PLP SQL is a procedural language written on top of Postgres. So Postgres, if you've ever looked at the docs, has about 1 billion features that no one ever uses because no one can find them because the docs are kind of bad and really disorganized. But people who know Postgres know that there's this procedural language where you can write basically functional code in Postgres, upload it to your database, and then run queries against these functional things. And they're really fast, or they're relatively fast. They're really consistent, and you can update them by just running a query, and it's pretty cool. And then they're basically like stored procedures, but more than that, they're basically like writing functions, and the language is really interesting. But anyway, so we have a ton of these. Each KPI has its function, or has a set of functions that build it. We run them nightly. They're run offline. They're run off a replica, not off our master database. We have some ways of running ad hoc, but we're trying to improve that. And the point is that it returns this fixed data, like actual fix that's actually saved back to the database. So that table that we saw, it was just returning not live, but querying a table to build the HTML table. And really, it's about the numbers. So trends are the pretty pictures, and that's completely separate from the KPIs. So this was the dashboard that I built originally, and it's really pretty, and it was nice, and it showed this week versus last week and last 60 minutes, and those numbers are fudged because they were fudged, not because I just blacked them out, because they weren't real numbers, basically, like I was saying. So note to self, don't write a time series database in Redis. Just don't do it. We did it. It was fun. I learned a lot, but it doesn't really work. It's slow, and Redis isn't slow, but querying 1,000 keys in Redis at a time is relatively slow. But the idea was that inserting things into Redis was really low impact, and so we spread all these metrics all around our code base, inserting things into this Redis store, and the insertion was really, really, really fast, and it was kind of so fast that it was inconsequential, and we just did it everywhere. It was really about like I said, we were generating graphs for it, and unlike the KPIs, which are fixed, it was about the relative differences. So it's literally about what is the difference between today and yesterday. And you guys know this already, but it was so true that we just removed the left-hand side of those graphs. There is no left-hand side because we're like, we don't actually care. 1, because the numbers are wrong. 2, because we don't care. It's not actually important. What's important is the difference between today and yesterday, between now and 20 minutes ago, et cetera. So obviously you guys are like, well, duh, there are better tools for this. So we went there. So went to StatsD, Graphite, and then we weren't really happy with the built-in Graphite interface, so we wrote our own. Yeah, I wonder why we did that. But yeah, it's not something that we're very happy with. Obviously, if I was starting out again, we would probably use Vibrato, but it was before we knew about that. So StatsD, everyone knows this. I can go through this really quickly, but we just have stuff littered around our code base and through logs that are, doing increments and timings on it, and we generate, pretty graphs. So this is, like I was saying, product metrics. So these are our key metrics. We still have the left-hand side of the graph, but it doesn't make any sense because these are summarized over different periods. But this is a week of key metrics. And then here's Rescue, which is our back-end job worker that we use, and here are the different jobs, and I wrote a plugin for Rescue that just makes these pretty graphs immediately. So then Graphiti. So what we wanted more than anything out of Graphite front end was the ability to play, because we started shoving all this data in it, and we found it really, really hard in the built-in Graphite interface to just be like, hey, here are like the 10 different metrics. I want to see them grouped, and now I want to add some functions to it. I want to maybe save that for later, then I want to play with it again. So that's what Graphiti is really optimized for, and I'm going to try to do a demo of it. I think I can actually get her a VPN, so I'll do it. But here you can see this is just a screenshot of it, and I'll show it to you for real. But basically, it's like, there's the graph, and then you have this JSON object that represents the graph, and you can just edit the JSON object, and it updates the graph. It's built in Sinatra, Sammy, and it's backed by Redis right now, but I'm working on porting it to Postgres, actually, because not because I don't love Redis, but because it just makes more sense, and stuff like full text search against graphs just are way easy, unless someone wants to build me a full text search engine in Redis. Don't try it. And then the graphs, like I said, were stored as JSON. We're using the really cool open source ACE editor, which is awesome. It used to be Cloud9, or no, now it's Cloud9, built in Cloud9. It used to be Bespin, which was Skywriter, which was something else before that. But it's a really nice built-in editor that lets you do tabbing and all the fun stuff. We create named dashboards, which are collections of graphs, and it's a work in progress. So I'm just gonna, I have pictures of it, but I'm just gonna, let's see if I can, okay, cool. So I just deployed while Afer was talking just now, so because I've been working on a new feature today. But here's our, and I wanted to be like, oh, it's gonna be awesome and show it. My internet went down at 2 p.m. today, which was awesome, so, and then my nose started bleeding. It was a really, really fun day. And yeah, it was awesome. So anyway, so here are all our dashboards, and dashboards are just named collections of named graphs. Each graph is just stored as a JSON object, and I'll show you in a second. Let's do something fun. So we've been statsing our Campfire usage. How many people use Campfire for daily communication? Maybe this will work. There we go. So we have, you can't really see them in these small things, but we have Campfire messages by room, Campfire GIFs by user. This is a really good tool as a manager. Whoops. Where'd it go? This is a really good tool as a manager to find out which of your employees are slacking off. Just kidding, I don't do that, but I do. So here's just the interface, like the edit interface, and it's, Graphite can create really beautiful graphs if you know how to tweak it. But basically, there are a lot of options that Graphite has, and it exposes them as these really wacky, it's built an interface as XJS, and you have to go through this crazy menu and do all that stuff. So what we decided to do is it's just, oh, if this loads. There it is. So here's the JSON object that created this, and you can just go in here and so I'm just going to change this to, and that should work. Yeah, there we go. So there's me. Just show legend. So that's me over time, how much talking I do in Campfire. I was gone for 3 weeks, so let's see, or for 2.5 weeks on vacation. So let's see what it looks like for 30 days, because it's probably dead for 2 weeks. Oh, yeah, look, I wasn't really there for that week, and then I came back on, yada, yada, yada. What I added today, which is something that people were asking for, is this idea of being able to see multiple intervals at once. And I struggled with this for a long time because when you save a graph, one of the cool features is this thing we call snapshots. And if I did different intervals, how was I going to do the different snapshots? And I think I figured it out. But literally, I just pushed this right before the meeting. So let's see if it actually works. Yeah, sort of. So this is 2 weeks, 3 hours. The title had 2 weeks in it, but it adds the 3 hours, 12 hours, 2 days, 1 week, 1 month. Say that again?
Are there multiple timescales on the same graph?
No, so this is just all the different intervals that you have up here. So this is just iterating over all those intervals. The UI isn't finished now because I just built this today, but it iterates over all the intervals. Ignore these titles, sorry. But this is for the past 3 hours. This is for 12 hours. This is for 2 days. This is for 1 week. This is for a month. So like you noticed when I went back, it actually got rid of my change because I didn't save it. But one of the things that we can do is, let's go back and edit this really quickly. So I'm just going to save a new graph, and now I have just me. And if I do Campfire messages, at AQ, and then now if I update this and do view all again, now it'll just be me, and it actually makes sense, like the titles actually make sense. But then I can also do this and do the see them in line here. The most important thing that we cared about actually a lot wasn't just the dashboards, but was this idea called snapshots. So the idea of snapshots is that we're in Campfire a lot. We're in email a lot, and we want to send around these graphs to each other. So a problem that I've seen, or when we were first using Graphite, was you have the Graphite URL, which is just a URL. It's a URL API, so you have all the relative timestamp in it. So you paste in an email, and you're like, hey, look at the past 30 minutes. You know, the CPU on this box is going crazy. And then you don't look at it for 2 days. You come back to that URL, and it's a completely different image because it's all relative. So we created this thing called snapshots, and all it does is it, if it works, all it does is actually take a snapshot of that graph and save it to S3 or your local file system, and then you just have an image of that graph that then you can paste around. Let's see. Okay, I don't know why this isn't working. Could just be the internet. Let's see. Oh no, there we go. Okay, so a snapshot like that, like you can see, this is just a S3 URL, and we can, if I pasted this into Campfire right now, it would be the exact same image when I was looking at logs later, because it's just a static image, which is super nice. And I'll talk about how we use that a little bit more in a second. So I'm going to go back to the slides, but that's the gist of Graphiti. There's a couple other things that you can do, which is pretty cool. But I want to talk more about the other things that we do. So yeah, like I was saying, Campfire GIFs. So back to the boring product stuff. So in the beginning, like I was saying, we set goal metrics, and just to show you what that looks like, when we talk about things and one of the ideas behind this moving the needle, mantra that we're doing is that we've split up metrics and how we talk about metrics into quantitative metrics and qualitative metrics, and we measure them in completely different ways. Or not measure them, but we talk about them in different ways. So when we were talking about that big number and how we failed, we were like, okay, well, actually, the metric that made up that big number was really made up of a lot of smaller numbers over time. And those smaller numbers were quantitative, meaning per user or per event basis, how many things were happening. So in our event, in our world, is like a card that someone sends. So per card, how many people were receiving that card. So if we wanted to hit this big number, that number of how many, the average number of how many people per that an event was sent to is really important. Then the other part of it, when for us, we established that as the velocity of our growth, right? So the number of n per x was the velocity. So for cards per user, referrals per guest, events per guest, those are fixed averages, or not fixed, moving averages over time that are talked about in some divided by some other number, right? And then qualitative that's qualitative. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Quantitative is completely different. Quantitative is just how many users are getting fed through that funnel. So if we have this big funnel and we tweak the numbers in those things, if we multiply the two, that's the big number, basically. So, and that's the acceleration of our growth, is how we take these per user metrics or per event metrics, and then we also talk about the rates. How many people are getting sent through this? What's the percentage of users that are converting? So what we realize is we can't talk about them together. A feature can't really move both. It moves one or the other. So for example, like fixing sign up or making sign up really easy, that will probably fix the funnel, but it won't fix the number of events that a user sends because it doesn't really affect that. So each feature has one of these, and we actually attach them to the spec. So we use GitHub issues for filing, feature requests, especially for performance and system stuff. So I've taken a snapshot of how poorly performing this controller action is, and I've told whoever's going to work on this is why it sucks, and this is what we need to do with it. And all they have to do is move that graph and change it in a meaningful way, and they've succeeded at that feature. And that specific thing, it's not like, hey, we need to make the site faster. No, it's this specific thing, and that qualitative metric of this page or this part of the site is faster, in theory and actually in practice, will increase the engagement of our users. So then for something on the other side, here's a feature that we're talking about. We're trying to set new goals for this team, and here it's kind of small, but the metrics that we're talking about, and these are the quantitative metrics. Here are the percent of the recipients that click in the site. We want to increase that as a rate, and the percent of mobile receivers, all of this stuff. So then we build out and roll out in chunks. Rolling out is feature flags. A lot of you guys have seen it. Etsy probably were the first ones who talked about it. And we just have a really, really simple UI, super simple. Here's the features that we have, and this is just a small list, but we have a ton, and we just, it's one of the most frightening experiences in the world for our managers and product people to go to this thing and, hey, here's this feature I built, click on this thing, and instantly everyone on the site has it. It's pretty frightening, and they get really scared when they're doing it. So I actually made it even scarier, because when you click on this, it actually pops up this awesome alert that's like, are you fucking sure? In big letters. And they get really scared, and they're like, are you sure I can do it? It's awesome. We can roll out in a couple different ways, just to all new accounts, just at login. And a really important thing that we discovered was this idea of alternating. So it seems really straightforward looking in hindsight, but we were testing this one feature, and we were like, oh, the rates for this specific feature aren't as good as the old version of the feature. And we couldn't figure out why. We're like, we're not converting as many people. We're not, or for specifically it was our new create tool. And we're like, people aren't using it in the same way. They're not saving as many cards, and we couldn't figure out why. Well, we had it rolled out to all new users in at login, but that's, you know, that's just a kind of a random selection of users, but it's not the same set, right? If we had a bunch of old users and a bunch of new users, old users are always gonna, existing users are always gonna behave differently than people who've just signed up. So the rates were completely different, and we, as soon as we introduced this feature of alternating, which is literally just you click this and every other user gets rolled out to, so the sets are actually more related, instantly that number just like shot up, and we're like, oh, okay, we were measuring completely wrong. So here's rollout.
Why don't you roll it for random fractions in the user base?
Random fractions?
Like random samplings, you don't like have a bias?
Yeah, so we do that too. That's not in the interface because we have, at this point, we have an order of millions of users, and random samplings of users, because of when they signed up and the event that they signed up for, like if they were signing up for sending a wedding, or if they were signed up for, it was Christmas time and they were sending a holiday card, a lot of times those user bases are completely different. So we could select like a random selection of people during like a specific time. Like here we want everyone from Christmas, you know, around Christmas, and that could give us a good number, but it really doesn't give us good numbers. We've tried that. It just doesn't work very well, just because of the way our users are segmented. If you did completely random, theoretically, you would get random behavior, but the way people use the site and when they sign up and what they're doing completely affects like those numbers.
We take their user ID, like 100, and just, you know,
yeah,
if you're really, yeah, that'll be.
We've done that, and it just doesn't work for us.
Could you be more specific?
So a user that signs up to send, for us, a user that signs up to send a holiday card is a completely different user than a user that signs up during the summer to send a barbecue invitation. And they behave differently, they spend money differently because of the times of year. So if we just get a random splattering, because we sign up probably 40x the number of users during Christmas than we do during barbecue season, those numbers just, if we just did mod 100, it just wouldn't spread evenly. It's just how it works.
You have a seasonality.
Because it's all about seasonality, because we're completely a seasonal based business.
Do you guys do like Facebook, like social profiles for users? Like how do you use that data into like in conjunction with your
Yeah, so we do. So it's not. That's a separate. That's outside of rollout usually. That's afterwards when we're reporting. We have segmentation and. Why am I forgetting the word? But we have tools to correlate people who have signed up through X or are active on X or have sent through X versus seasonality versus something else, and how those group together. That's actually a completely different tool that no one except for our COO uses, and it's called RJ Metrics. It's a warehousing tool, and basically it just gives you all this data and dumps it in and does it. But it's if you think Graphiti is a bad interface, or Graphite's a bad interface, you've never seen RJ Metrics. No offense if anyone here works at RJ Metrics. It's just really strongly geared towards people in suits, and it's really hard. It's really hard for us nerds to use. I've used it before. It makes really pretty graphs, not quite as pretty as Graphite, and it gives you really good numbers, and you can do the segmentation, but you can't do really real time. It's a data warehousing, so it's dumped, like for us it's dumped nightly, and you have to monitor over time. Sorry. Anyone else? Okay, I'm gonna keep going. So reporting along the way, and this is the last part, and for us, like I was saying about the snapshots, so one of the cool features in Graphiti is we built this thing that with the snapshots, it snapshots a dashboard every morning, or all our dashboards, and sends these really, really nice emails of, this is the dashboard, and these are all the graphs that you have in the dashboard. And every morning at 9 a.m., when I'm on my way to work, I'm looking at these on the BART, and everyone is kind of, and seeing how things performed. And we found that pushing data versus pulling data always makes a really big difference. When we just had Graphiti there, and we just had Graphite there, and we just had the KPIs there, we actually do daily KPI emails too. People would check, but only certain people, and if they forgot to check, they forgot to check. Email, as sucky as email can be sometimes, it just having this in your inbox every morning, especially at 9 a.m. when everyone's kind of commuting, makes a really big difference. So then we round up and report. With the qualitative and quantitative and the moving the needle, the important thing, like I said, we've tried to eliminate these big numbers. So numbers aren't as important as positive change, because if you move a percentage of a rate 0.01% and then multiply that by the number of users, or you add an average of 0.01, cents per user that gets spent, and then you multiply that by the rate of users that are getting in, that's positive change, and the more users you can send to the funnel, the bigger that can be. And so right now like I said, with the continuous process delivery, we're starting to gather metrics about how metrics-driven development works and how we're doing on this moving the needle stuff, and it's going pretty well. We just deployed a feature 2 weeks ago that was the smallest change that, based on just focusing on the single thing that we want to change, completely changed our conversion rate from receivers to senders. Little thing, and it changed it by 1%, and that's turned into a lot of users, and we're really, really happy. For other features, like the performance features, a cool thing about Graphite and Graphiti, and this is something that I don't know if everyone knows, but you can actually draw visual horizontal lines in graphs. So you can, an arbitrary line, so we can say, we need to get this feature below this line, or this performance below this line in terms of milliseconds, and people get obsessed with crossing that finish line, and it works really well. So that's all I have. Thank you. I'm happy to talk more about Graphiti and anything, and please ask me questions. I'm hot, but I'm happy to get more questions. Anybody? Oh.
Do you do any just like straight up A/B testing that's not the like alternating rollout?
Yeah, we've tried. For a while we did some tests with Google Optimizer, just like really simple ones to try that out. Or is it Google Site Optimizer? They have like 3 different optimizers, but one of them is for A/B testing, and it works pretty well. We haven't seen as good results from that as from actually moving stuff around and changing the way things work, which is kind of hard to do a lot of times in A/B testing. So rollout, the benefit of rollout is you can really change an entire page or add a completely new feature or do something really big. A/B is a little harder to do that. Something really meaningful. Most people talk about A/B as changing your sign up button or something like that. We've started using the A/B/C/D testing, like the octopus model of testing, where it actually is, increasing the rate as it goes along, and that's worked out really well. But only for small things so far, nothing big. Anybody else? Cool. I get 2 rounds of applause.